Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Catherine, for our inaugural Leadership Journeys. My hope is that this will be an opportunity for folks to get to know you better. So thank you for being the initial guest.
I am so honored, Lou. I had to be honest with you. I'm so honored.
Well, let's try and share with everybody else a little bit about your background. So can you tell us or share with us just a little bit about your background for me?
Sure. So I'm not originally from the Northeast, even though I represented the Northeast. I'm actually a recovering Disney dancer that thought that HR was going to be easier. Obviously, not so much. So I grew up in Orlando, Florida, and I moved to Boston, Mass. Many years ago. I now live in New Hampshire. And I moved during the middle of the worst snowstorm we had at the time. So obviously, I'm a glutton for punishment. I've been in HR for many moons, as I like to say, not so old as when they used to call it personnel. So I'm past that. So definitely in the HR world and in a variety of industries, kind of started in the recruiting field and went into employee relations and compliance and benefits and the like. But that's always interesting. And I'm actually in my generation, I consider myself one of the rare unicorns because I actually went to college for human resources of all things. Back then, they really didn't have those tracks, and now they seem to have more of those. So, interesting little background. But yes, now I'm in the nice cold tundra of New Hampshire.
So I have a question then, because if you went at a time when your undergrad was in HR, was there math required for that major?
Yes, there was because I was in a communications field, but I just love math. So they did have some math, but I took extra. Of course I did. Why wouldn't I just stop at what was required? I know.
Wow.
Overachiever.
That explains so much.
I know.
So you're doing all that stuff and you get out of school and whatnot with work, but how do you come into your volunteer leadership role?
So it's interesting. I think I went to a few chapter meetings, and actually it was in Florida at those chapter meetings, moved up to Boston, moved to New Hampshire, and finally kids were at a point where I could finally have two children. They're not children anymore, but at the time I was like, I'll go and learn a little bit more. And someone came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, you're at every single of these meetings. Would you like to be a part of our programming committee?" And I had no idea what programming meant. I thought computer programming, which I had no background in that either. But I did learn very quickly what a programmer was. And it was great. I got to meet all the local attorneys in town because I would reach out and say, "Here's who I am and here's what I'm trying to do." So it started with programming, and then it kind of migrated to all the different roles in the chapter up to a president. The only role I didn't have, and I think I said this to you a while back, is the treasurer. And of all things, math is my thing. I could have done fine with it, but that's okay. And then you kind of just progression. I didn't even know what the state council was. No idea that all these chapters kind of fed into a state council. Didn't know the SHRM, framework by any stretch. And then worked into the state council and became the state council director after being on all the core leadership areas, again, except for treasurer, even the secretary, but not the treasurer. And then, as you know, the past MAC, the Membership Advisory Council, that is, as you know, the highest elected official, and there's 5 that represent. And I was honored to be elected by my 11 states at the time, which thankfully you now hold. But it was a great honor to do that. And I consider the MAC to be kind of the pinnacle of your HR career, not the end, because now it's on the downhill slide, but the pinnacle of your kind of volunteer leader role. And it really does provide you an opportunity that, to get to meet a lot of people, including you, Lou.
And it has been wonderful meeting you as well.
So,
Now, so who approached you then about submitting your hat, proverbially speaking, for the MAC?
I'm trying to remember how it was. Oh, I know what happened. It took me a moment because I'm trying to remember who was the one that really pushed me into it. There's several people, but one person said you should absolutely do this. One was Mike Aiken. He was kind of the nail in the coffin. Like, I think you'd be great. And I knew Mike from, if you remember his previous role before the chief membership officer, he handled all of the legislative and legal and you were part of that. That's somewhat how I met you as well. And so I knew him from kind of being on the A team, the advocacy team. But the real person that kind of started it was a gentleman called Dave Twitchell. He was a prior Mac, and he was from Vermont, our neighboring state to New Hampshire. And ironically, so he said, I was in the Mac years ago. He was, back in the day, much different experience than what I ended up having and probably what you're having. However, he said, you'd be great. You know people. It's a great way to network. You get to learn about the inside workings of SHRM. Really great opportunity to have a voice to the board and to the executive team. Interestingly enough, he's one of the few, if not the only, state council directors in MAC who now is a state council director in New Hampshire. So he's served in 2 different states because he's one of those borderline guys, meaning borderline states, not borderline guys, borderline state, sorry. So he's right on the border, and now he's the director of the New Hampshire State Council, which was my old position a while back. So he's the one who kind of said, hey, you should. And then Mike Hickens said, I think you'd be awesome. Why don't you go out for it? So those kind of 2 different ways to get there.
Well, I can tell you that personally, I'm thrilled that both of them pushed you to do it.
And I pushed you, so it's only fair.
It's all good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in addition to being a stellar volunteer leader, there are so many other things that you do, and I'm just kind of curious to sort of let everybody know, what's your day job?
I know we have those, don't we? I actually get paid to do my day job. And that's interesting in itself, in and of itself. So I am the Chief Human Resources Officer for a company called CGI Business Solutions, and I actually run a separate division as well, which is CGI's HR Consulting. We're a benefits broker, wealth management, which is like 401k, business insurance, which is like your liability, workers' comp, and the like. We do payroll or payroll service provider, and then HR consulting. So I actually run my own division and my own P&L. So I have a lot of work to do. So I do work after hours because you kind of have to with the day job and volunteer role.
So you're really bored is what you're saying.
Oh, totally bored. But my kids are grown. So there's a big difference now. I'm not chasing them around in the hockey rink like I used to, like you do.
That never ends, apparently.
Nope.
So, it's interesting. And I think everybody has a different way of approaching this. But how do you balance the volunteer leadership role with your day job responsibilities, given everything you've got going on?
It has gotten easier over time. And you said the operative word, it's different for everybody. I think the balancing act comes with what role you're in and increasing responsibility in the leadership role for volunteer leadership. I think becomes a tad bit easier because you get to know what the systems are. You're not learning everything. It's not as deep and wide. It's a little bit more like, okay, I know what I'm doing now. It's a little bit easier. So I think over time, incrementally kind of working your way through the SHRM, volunteer structure, I think is a little bit easier. When I had the children and they were in a young age, it was a little bit more challenging. But like I said, that they've grown up, they're out of the house. But it is a little bit after hours. But I think if you do your research, I think it's work smart, not hard. Or maybe there is probably some hard part, but working smart is so important. And I never tried to reinvent the wheel. Like I was looking at, SHRB's old VLRC, which is better now, as you know. And I would look up things and say, what is out there? I would Google stuff because I couldn't find it on VLRC at the time. Now you can. But back then, that was so important to me. And I literally going to VLBM, Volunteer Leaders Business Meeting, and sharing and listening, I learned so much, and that helped me balance what was expected versus what my own head said what the expectation was. So I think it's good to kind of bounce off different states, different chapters. And that's, I think, how I balanced it. And then I think finally, the most important part was my work supported me and my team supported me, and they knew that I was getting information that was fresh off the boat, so to speak, and knowing that I would bring something back to the table, and I did. So they really did support me and continue to do so. They're like, wait a second, you're not doing that anymore? I'm like, no, but I'm still somewhat involved.
Well, don't think we're not going to keep you involved.
You're funny.
Listen, I'm speaking the truth.
Oh. Hotel California.
Yeah, there you go.
Hmm.
It's it's interesting because I think we're always trying to explain to the person coming after us all the various things that we do. And so letting them know there is a path forward and that, hey, there is a reason to go to the volunteer business meeting or to annual. And it's not just about going to get credit, but it's that opportunity to meet your colleagues and your peers and be able to network. And to your point, the goal is not necessarily to recreate the wheel, but to figure out the better mousetrap.
That's right. And that's funny coming from working for Disney. The mousetrap is real for me. So that's a great one. I love that. That's awesome. And you're right. And VLBM annual and RCBM, the regional council business meeting, if you're at the state council meeting or state council level, I think that's just so important to really leverage. And I think you did a fabulous job. I remember when I was a MAC and we'd have our meetings and people would say, "What do you have?" And if you had something in place and you did from New Jersey, you shared it with everybody that asked. So I think that's what those meetings are about. So it makes your balancing act back to that much easier.
And I think that's a really good point. And so when we think about trying to lay out the playbook that I know that Sherman and the MAC are currently working on, that's exactly what we're talking about now, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you think back, what has surprised you the most in your own volunteer leadership journey so far?
Couple of things. One, I didn't realize that the volunteer network was such a big fabric and the backbone of SHRM. I just always thought that SHRM was just so large and we were just the tiny. No, it's the opposite. SHRM is what, 300 something employees. And then you've got the volunteer network, which if you think about how many chapters and state councils, I think there's 51 state councils. I think there's still 556 chapters around that. I'm going back to my MAC days. It was about that. And there's no way that SHRM could do that without the volunteer leaders. And I'm not just blowing smoke. I'm telling you, you'll see this if you haven't already, they're really reliant on the volunteer leaders. That is how SHRM really runs. There's no way for all those initiatives and objectives and goals for membership if it weren't for the volunteer leaders. So that surprised me. I think the other thing that surprised me that I learned really at the MAC level, but I always bring it back to all of the states I've spoken to. And when they ask me to speak, I say that, the people at SHRM are genuine. And you can attest to this. Mike Aiken and Meredith Krishner, I always say Nethercutt. I had to remember that for a moment. It's hard harking back to rural days. They're the kind of the shepherds of the MAC, right? They tell you where to go, what to do, and how to get there, and they're kind of all there around you. And it's interesting when you kind of walk around headquarters, which I know everyone doesn't get an opportunity to do anymore, but people are generally trying to do the right thing without anyone looking. It's kind of that integrity thing. It's really there. I've heard people say, "Did you know?" or "What would the members think?" and "Did you hear that Susie's, grandfather passed away?" And these are they're talking about volunteer leaders. So I will say that the genuine behind the scenes, they're real people, just like the board. You get to meet the board, and people think of them as being this kind of, SHRM, and I say SHRM, like the Wizard of Oz, and who's behind the curtains. And we got an opportunity. You got to see us when we were in New Orleans, and regular people, they cry like us, they care like us, they're passionate about the profession. Even if they're not even in HR, they're still passionate about that. So that was a really big surprise and opened my eyes to there's more to what you see and think just at a chapter level. Like there's so much more, and I highly encourage people to continue that volunteer leader path.
Well, and honestly, that's part of the reason to even put this kind of a program together, because not everyone knows you. And we certainly, you and I joke even offline about how awesome the Northeast is, but of course, we're just one part of a larger pie. And
Yeah, we're very competitive, as you know.
That's true.
Okay.
but it's funny because it's so important, I think, to make sure that people understand that there are an awful lot of people across the country and around the world that make all this stuff work. And contrary to popular belief, even at the MAC level, we're volunteers. We're not getting paid.
No. And even when they say that the board of directors gets paid, they really don't get paid, enough to sustain them. It's not a full-time job, it's a stipend at best. And from what I understand, from what I've heard, but even they have a passion for it, but we even have more of a passion, in my opinion, because we're doing this totally voluntary. There is absolutely no benefit for us. In fact, it's a detriment sometimes to our day job, as you and I have talked about offline, of trying to, at that level, how do you manage 11 states with all of the things that they're asking you to do? And you want to be there, but it's really challenging. But yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It's interesting when you start to kind of peel back the layers of SHRM, right?
Oh no, listen, I'm right there with you. And the cool part is, and I think you and I are indicative of a lot of the people we know around the country who are volunteer leaders, and the passion kind of jumps off the page, if you will.
Mm.
But
Oh, yes.
I'm wondering, outside of that, what are
Mhm.
you passionate about?
So, well, I'm passionate about lots of things. But I think learning is a big thing, and making connections with people, and that's not just SHRM, that's not just HR, that's just in general. And I think that's what got me into HR. At least one of the reasons is, making those connections and learning from people. And, it kind of bled into my HR career as much as the one thing I learned, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, but my dad was in HR, and that's how I kind of knew about HR. And he told me some crazy things in HR, and he worked for Disney. Yeah, he was one of the first HR people. We talked about this, and there was some crazy stuff he chatted about. And so for me, I learned more going to chapter meetings, which is how they then tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, will you help with programming?" But I learned that everything he said wasn't necessarily true. Don't tell him that. Um, I think he was trying to scare me, quite frankly, but he was in a different arena of HR at the time, obviously, than I was. So yeah, that's interesting. But I am passionate about, just continuous learning. I love to read. I'm an avid reader. Doesn't always have to be, it can be kind of bad stuff. It can be good stuff, it can be, self-help books. It can be anything. So I'm pretty open to types and genres other than anything really scary. I don't like those. I don't sleep at night after watching or reading those kind of books.
All
So
right.
don't borrow, don't lend me any of those.
Well, I know that we've chatted at times about your dad and his history in HR, but I'm wondering, and there's no restriction on this, but what's the best advice that you've ever received?
Always listen before you speak. Always. And I think that served me well in a lot of different ways. And another way to say it, and I think this is what my mom said, you have two ears and one mouth for a reason. That took me a while to realize what she meant, but always listen before you speak. And it has saved me because I have walked into scenarios, especially in HR, same in your field. And I know you're HR and legal, the legal world. But if you listen, sometimes they'll tell you something that you come in with a certain conception, and then it changes because they've told you something that you were not aware of. You've learned something about them that you may have not been aware of before. So I think it's always listen before you speak, and always get, both sides, if all sides of the story. And I have really learned from that. And especially leading in a volunteer leader group, listen to everybody before you think you know it all. And don't tell my kids that I don't know it all, because they really do think that I do know it all.
Because you tell them.
No, nope. They just know that, moms, typical moms, typical dads, we must know it all. So I'm not going to profess, although they're adults now. So I guess I could tell them, but so it's okay.
Well, it's funny. Last week I had somebody reach out who had just emigrated from another country and was trying to get involved in SHRM and the MAC, and how do they do that? And it was very interesting back and forth as I connected them with their state director and sort of explained the tapestry of the SHRM Volunteer Network. But I'm curious, had you been on that call, what would you have said to them if they were considering becoming a volunteer leader in either a chapter or a conference committee or on a state council?
First, I applauded that they actually contacted you, because I find that in this day and age, we have to contact them and, ask them, voluntold. They get voluntold, as we joke about, or helium hands that we talk about, like somehow your hand gets raised. So I first applaud them for even thinking about volunteering. So that's one thing I would have said. I think it's really important to volunteer. As an HR professional, you really do need to give back in order to perpetuate the career and validate the career and the profession in and of itself. So I think it's good. It's a good way to kind of understand more about not just human resources, but more about people and leading. And especially if you've never led anyone, and let's say you're a generalist and you're just starting out in your career, this gives you an opportunity to see how kind of a business runs. And where else are you going to get that type of an opportunity with something that you care about, meaning human resources? And you're getting to see what a president does, a vice president does, someone in marketing or membership, and all of the different core leadership areas, DE&I, diversity, and the like. All of that culminates into its own little business unit, and you're getting an opportunity at the ground level to learn how that business runs. And then again, learning more about the HR community. And I think and I don't think it should be a resume builder. I think that's where, if it's just for that and you're there for the glory, you're in the wrong profession and the wrong thought process, because I really do think it needs to be something that you're giving to the profession, you're getting something back. And where I believe I got things back was just getting to meet people from different parts of the country, especially at the MAC level, but even without that, even if you're going to a volunteer leader business meeting. But I never would have met my counterpart in Oregon with Shawneen. I never would have met someone in Oregon. I never would have met someone in Montana. I never would have met someone, well, maybe in Texas, because my son is stationed there, but I never would have met HR people in Texas, and then I wouldn't have met you, Lou. I mean, if we didn't have these volunteer opportunities, and yes, we do have fun. So that's, I guess, something else I would say is you get to meet some great people that you probably wouldn't have gotten an opportunity. You get an opportunity at the ground floor to see what a business looks like. And that's a great leadership kind of a training ground if that's what you're wanting to do at the end of the day. But just that amazing community that we have, that even to this day we're all connected. I may be an emeritus or whatever you want to call us, but we still have those connections. We're still all connected on all these different platforms. And when we see each other, it's like, hey, at annual conference, at talent, at, name all the different conferences SHRM has. And, that's a community that just doesn't go away as long as you're in that career and if you're involved with SHRM. So that's maybe one thing I would say is, yes, do it. Thank you for asking. And two, definitely do it, but don't do it just to bolster your resume. It's not for that.
It's funny too, because I think as we talk about, is an organization virtual? Are you hybrid? Are you all in the office? And you're looking for different opportunities. The big challenge is, well, where do I learn certain things? Where do I get certain skills? And I think it's often overlooked how many different things you can learn in a volunteer role that are absolutely transferable to any number of different opportunities.
Oh, absolutely. And what's great is sometimes I bring that back to our CEO, and especially when you're meeting with the board of directors and you say, hey, I met so-and-so from the Boys and Girls Club, yada, yada, yada. And they're like, so-and-so? And I'm like, guess what? Yes, I do. So you just never know who you're going to meet, or meeting an employment attorney like you. And what if I have a need? Those are resources that are just so invaluable. The person, you've worked with them, you've worked within a little business unit of a volunteer leader structure, state council, and the like. You can now go to your employment attorney or your boss and say, I have an employment attorney and I know he's good because I've seen him work. I've physically watched him and his mind work, and I think we should use them. So yeah, I think that's amazing about the network that we have.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because I think even if we're talking about benefits or 401k issues or what have you, just to know you have someone when an issue comes up, even if it's, listen, I'm not sure, am I on the right track, to be able to pick up a phone or shoot an email or text is so invaluable.
Oh, absolutely.
And you otherwise wouldn't have that.
Absolutely. And that's why the network with you has been great. And I can't, advocate anymore that, if you're their MAC, they absolutely should connect with you. And we gave the 10 reasons. You put it in a wonderful video, which I think was awesome. And I use it now when I talk to people. I'm like, here you go. Here's the video. Here's what he can do for you. But yeah, leveraging that, your background and your specific background, and the same with others. They may have a specific background, like they may love social media and their media giants, which I'm not. No, not like you.
Oh, please. I'm hardly, trust me, but we're working on that. So, um, what's something that people may not know about you, Catherine?
So we talked a little bit about my Disney days. So I was a dancer and a singer, and I put that first, dancer first, singer second. So I've never been the frontline person. I never was a soloist. And we talked about the fact that my kids were in hockey like yours. So I chased them around. And I talked about being an avid reader, but I also didn't talk about that I'm an avid golfer. I didn't get into golfing until much later in life after hockey was done, and just absolutely love it. Every trip we go on, if it's somewhere where there's golf, my husband and I make sure to golf. So that's something that people may or may not know about me, is that I am an avid golfer.
That's kind of cool. I'll have to keep that in mind, although I'm sure that your handicap is much better than mine. Well, I really as I sit back, I think the connectivity of everyone is so important. And so if somebody's watching this or listening to it, however they may be listening, and want to reach out and contact you, what's the best way to do that?
So there's, everyone has different ways to connect, and we joke about, I guess the time of pagers is gone, right? So I don't need to give that number. I'm joking. There's no pager anymore. Pagers, beepers. Remember those times? So
Over
there,
there on your desk, right next to the. Never mind.
maybe so. No, no. That's the old SHRM thing. If you see that, that's funny. That's an old SHRM from when it used to be called VLS, the Volunteer Leaders Summit, back in 2018, pre-COVID. That's how we say things. It's PC or what, AC, pre-COVID or after COVID. I know, I had to do that. So social media is the best way, Catherine Mirabile, and there may be several Catherine Mirabiles, who would have known? But look at me. I'm on your LinkedIn. I'm with you. Like, I'm connected to you on LinkedIn. Facebook even. I mean, but I have to shut mine down. My son is a Marine, so I have to be careful with what I say. So I shut it down a little bit. But LinkedIn, Twitter. I don't tweet a lot, but I'm still on it. But yeah, C Mirabile at cgibenefitsgroup.com. Reach out. And if it's something that you just want to chat, want to connect, love to do so. But I think social media is the best way, because that way I know who you are before you just send me an email. I think it's spam. So I think LinkedIn is probably the best method.
Well, I really want to say, as usual, it is awesome to be able to spend time with you. And I will say that one of the true pleasures of having the opportunity to represent the Northeast as the MAC rep is to consider you as one of my friends. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you at the next conference, just a short time away from now.
Yes, in Vegas. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. Make sure to stop by and say hi to me, and definitely say hi to Lou.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Catherine.